This is CNN Breaking News.
We are learning there's been some kind of an incident right now on the London Bridge. Coming in right now, I need to bring to you, we're getting word that a van has plowed into a crowd of people in central Barcelona.
Un atentado en medio de las Ramblas de Barcelona.
Anguish after a suicide bombing outside a concert in Manchester.
This is the year that terrorism really became the new normal here in Europe.
ISIS maintains certain capabilities, even if those capabilities are just in terms of propagating its ideology, because its ideology is deadly.
When we look back, it becomes clear that the near collapse of ISIS after terrorizing so many people in the world for several years is one of the most important developments that we've seen throughout the year. Firstly, of course, we saw the fall of Mosul. But then to see the fall of Raqqa, which was their self-declared caliphate capital inside Syria, was really just a tremendous moment.
It is official. U.S.-backed fighters today declared the Syrian city of Raqqa fully liberated.
The fall of those two key cities does mark really this hugely symbolically important swathe of territory which ISIS held. It was awful to see the sheer volume of destruction and human life that had to be wasted for that seemingly inevitable conclusion to finally come around.
Just in being in this one small part of western Mosul, one begins to get a little bit of appreciation for the intensity of the battle, just how terrifying it must have been for those civilians that were stuck here amidst all of this.
The story of the fall of Mosul is told, at least from my perspective, in freeze-frame moments that, to me, encapsulate everything that the battle has cost the Iraqi population. There's a moment when a little girl is clutching her dead mother's body, hiding under an abaya for 2 days because ISIS had indiscriminately slaughtered everyone around her while she was waiting to be rescued. There's the moment of another little girl who had just stumbled into a medical clinic close to the front lines. She had just lost her entire family, and yet there she was trying to console her wounded older sister, who was just talking about the fact that they'd lost their parents, that they were now orphans. The population of Iraq may be able to live free of ISIS's rule, but it is going to take decades, if not generations, for them to free themselves of the psychological impact of everything that they have sacrificed and lost.
Obviously, there was a lot of sacrifice on the ground by Iraqi soldiers, by those US-backed Kurdish fighters, but at the end of the day, it was American firepower that really turned this around in both Mosul and Raqqa.
There it is, the river that runs through the heart of Mosul that marks the end of ISIS territory in Iraq, really. But between these Iraqi special forces and that body of water that marks victory are still just dozens of ISIS fighters still holding out.
I think in the closing days of the fights in Old City and Mosul, we saw ISIS fighters actually giving themselves up. It was extraordinary to see, sort of face-to-face, meters away, how ordinary and human these ISIS fighters were.
ISIS forced me here, he insists.
Because ISIS would dig themselves in so intensely. That left the city not just in ruins, but frankly, unrecognizable, unusable, unfit for human life.
Well, The fighting both across Syria and Iraq has displaced hundreds of thousands of people who are almost viscerally desperate just to be able to go back home. And the longer that they're left to languish in refugee camps, the more vulnerable they become.
The tragedy of the migrant crisis and the refugee crisis is that it really has turned politics upside down. But beyond that, the suffering of these people has continued unabated. The Mediterranean has continued to be, as an Italian prime minister once said, a cemetery instead of a siege. And CNN has had the most incredible reporting where it has exposed actual slave auctions among migrants in Libya, for instance, where they end up.
A man addressing an unseen crowd. Big strong boys for farm work, he says. 400. 700. 700. 800. The numbers roll in. These men are sold for 1,200 Libyan pounds, $400 apiece. You are watching an auction of human beings.
We first heard about this story about 3 years ago. We were covering the migrant crisis. So we were speaking to people who would say, I was told that there was a boat leaving from Tripoli to Europe, but when I arrived, there were no boats. I was just sold. The exploitation, the sale of the migrants was becoming an economic end in and of itself. We're now in Tripoli and we're starting to get a little bit more of a sense of how this all works. Our contacts are telling us that there are 1 to 2 of these auctions every month and that there is one happening in the next few hours. We knew going in that this was going to be something unlike anything we'd done before. I knew that I had to really think long and hard about what it would mean to go in there as a dark-skinned woman. There are, in fact, Sudanese from Western Sudan, from Darfur, who have been enslaved, who have been sold.
We're ushered into one of 2 auctions happening on this same night. Crouched at the back of the yard, a floodlight obscuring much of the scene. One by one, men are brought out as the bidding begins. 400, 500, 600, 700. Very quickly, it's over.
They kept referring to in Arabic as al-budaa, the merchandise. I honestly don't know what to say. That was probably one of the most unbelievable things I've ever seen. In 2017, there are tens of thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of people who have been sold into forced labor, who have been enslaved, who have been tortured. In terms of the response that we've had, there has been a real outcry. The UN Security Council has had a number of meetings discussing what the appropriate action should be. The Libyan government has said that it has started a formal investigation. I hope this is a turning point, but only if we maintain the pressure, because it is so critical to keep this out there, to keep this as part of the public conversation, because when people stop caring, that's when bad things happen.